All right, I think you're good. Okay, so Tim, I'll take it. I'll hand over to you and let you take it away.
All
Thanks.
right. You can hear me okay, Mike?
Yes, all good.
All right, let me just get and you see my screen with the presentation?
Yes, yep.
Okay, great. So again, Mike, really, thanks a lot for letting me come. This is my third time actually talking about this. So, really, I really love talking about Power BI and Power Automate. I am Tim Weinzapfel. Mike, I was assuming you did not want to try to pronounce my last name.
Right.
I'll
mess that
save you
up.
that. Couple real quick about me. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. As Mike mentioned, I am a member of the Enterprise DNA Expert Team, and so I did have done I actually have a course on the platform that actually covers this exact topic, and then I've done some other trainings, and then I just got experience across other areas. But one of my big passions is really working in Power BI and then integrating it with the Power Platform. So today, what I really want to do is just kind of talk about how you can integrate Power BI with Power Automate and Power Apps, and kind of just show some examples. And even if you've not worked in Power Automate or Power Apps, I will say I think it's very easy to get into it and then really integrate it with Power BI. I find that the three of these platforms really integrate well. And I'll give some examples of things that I've done and just to kind of get started and to do that. But gonna kick things off. What I want to do is kind of give us case study, because I sort of feel like this kind of sets the stage, especially as I give some examples. So I'm going to set the stage in this hypothetical scenario where I manage a team of projects, and I have a Power BI report to track the project statuses, and of course I'll show that. And then these are some common tasks that I do. I have to email project managers for status updates. I have to update SharePoint documents. I'm going to ignore this third one because although you can do populate Word documents with Power Automate from Power BI data, I'm not going to get into that today. But again, and then there's some other things these are some tasks that I have to do. I have to, update status updates. So much of this is manual. So let me jump over to let's jump over to my sample report here. And I have the report, and I'm actually going to let me switch to desktop. Mike, I'm going to do another check. Is my screen still coming across okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
Looks great,
good.
Tim.
So here's a very simple report that I've got set up. I'm going to start with Power Automate and give some examples. So I've got a simple report. I've got, I've got a project ID here, the name, and then just some information that I have to do to manage this. And I got a few statuses. So if I clear this, I've got 20 records. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, and this is a great way to really get started into integrating Power Automate with Power BI. And that is really just creating a simple refresh button. Now, this is a SharePoint list that I'm connecting to, so it is an import. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a very simple refresh button. I have one right here, but it's right here is the Power Automate visual that comes standard. So let's go ahead and do that. When I click on this, I'm actually going to click on it. It's triggered the flow that will just trigger a refresh. This would be the same as if I went to my Power, let me just go to my thing here. If I were to just go here and hit refresh, and you can see it was refreshing, so it's just refresh. So very, very easy to set up. And now I will say too, if you've worked in Power Automate separately, because you can actually go into Power Automate separately, this will actually, I'm going to show just a few minor differences. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add in my Power Automate button in my visual, and it will give you some instructions. I can expand this here, and it tells me I can add data and then set up my flow by hitting the edit in the more options, and then I can formatting it. So we're going to do that. Now it does say here to add data, and this is the data that will be connected into my flow. But in this example, I don't really need any data because all I want to do is I'm going to use Power Automate to refresh my flow, or my data set. So I'm actually not going to do that. And here's the data fields that you can add. We'll get to that in my next example. So I'm going to go up here. I'll move it up here out of the way. I'll go up here to the more options, and I will click edit. Now what it's going to do is it's going to open up Power Automate directly in my Power BI desktop application. Now, I am using Power BI desktop here, and later on when I'm doing my Power Apps example, I'm actually going to use the Power BI service, because what you'll find is there are just a few little nuances that I will cover. But so I've got a few flows here that I've already created. One thing to be aware of, and in my case, I'm creating a new one, but once you create and create a flow in a button that is attached to a flow in your report, it does not indicate which one is actually attached to your flow. So just be aware of that, and I'll probably show an example when I open up my next one. But in my case, I'm going to create a new flow, and I'm just going to do an instant cloud template. You can actually scroll down further, and there's some other examples here, but I'm going to create a new one. Now, the one thing to be aware of with Power Automate is the first item in this little user interface is always what's called the trigger. This is the first step that actually kicks off the flow. And then when you're doing this with Power BI, it's always going to be the Power BI button click. That is what is kicking off the flow because it needs something to initiate. So all I'm going to do is click on New Step. And now what I want to do is now it's asking me for a connector. Now these are all the connectors, and there's lots and lots of connectors, and these are the applications that you're connecting to. In my case, I want Power BI, so I will just search for it, and there it is. And it's going to now show me all the actions. Now what happens is this first step is always the trigger, and then everything after is actions because that's what you're telling it to do next. And then there's a whole number of actions that the Power BI connector has. And so I can go down here and I can see refresh a data set. So all I have to do is click on this. It's going to ask me for my workspace. So and it's going to load up all the workspaces that I have available. I have a training one here. And then it's going to ask me for my data set. And of course, it takes a second because it knows that I'm trying to give a presentation here. If I get that to load a little quicker. There it is. And this is the data set I have. And there it is. And I'm going to go up here and then titled, and I'm just going to call this, I will call this test refresh 2. And I will save it. And I will do save and apply. And now this flow has been successfully, I get the little indication here, and I can return back to my report. And then there is the button. So I can resize this. I can change the formatting. You can change the color and so on. One thing I have not found a way to do is remove the little triangle unless you were to say place a little, blue square over it. But that's just one thing. But you can format the button and make it look a little bit different, like I have done in here, just different colors. Now, all I have to do is hit it, and I've triggered it, and it's essentially, it will do the thing. If I jump back over to my Power BI, let's see if it was triggering, and there it goes. It's triggering, and there it is. So very easy and quick to set up a way to refresh the data. Mike, I'm going to do a quick pause just to see if there was any initial questions.
Sure. Looks like there's one from Matt. Matt, you want to ask your question?
Actually,
yeah.
Actually, I thought Dean was first before me.
Oh, I didn't see. Okay, didn't scroll up.
Okay, I do see the question. I'm looking at it over here. The first one, do you have to create the flow inside Power BI desktop, or you connect to a flow created in Power Automate? That is a great question. I don't know that I've not actually tried to create a flow outside of Power BI when integrating it. I've always started here. And one reason is especially when you get into using dynamic content, you have to go through the Power BI desktop in order to access dynamic content. And I will show that. So I don't know, and I don't know if anyone else has tried that. The second one, Matt, is around the Power Automate environment. Great question. Can you change which one is being used? The answer is no. Now, what this means is when you work in the Power Platform, you have what's called environments, very similar to, I always look at them as workspaces. Power BI has workspaces. Power Platform, Power Apps, and Power Automate have environments. As of right now, like for example, if I go here to, let's say I want to connect the flow, and let's say I want to change the flow. Right now, only the default environment is, all these flows are available on the default environment. I understand when I was reading some of the Power BI updates that are coming, one of them was that they would allow different environments, which I would be really excited for. I did find a workaround somewhere that somebody had online. It looked very, very, I will say complex. But right now, the standard one is the default environment only. So I hope that answered the two questions.
Cool.
And I see that, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my follow-up is, how do you know what is your default environment in Power Automate?
So within, as far as I'm aware, so with the Power Platform, there is the default environment which everybody has access to. It's going to be that same one that everybody has access to for Power Platform.
So you can't change it for yourself. It's
Correct.
automatic. Okay, cool. That is what I found also, but wanted to make sure I was correct. So cool. Thank you.
I'm anxiously awaiting that, because then when you get into solutions and you're working with other environments, it causes some disorganization. And I did see we have already a refresh button. Why do we need a refresh now? I'm going to table that one. When I get into Power Apps, I'll kind of show one area I've used it, but to helpfully do that. But I do the example here because I always find that this is sort of just a great teaser into Power Automate. All right, Mike, I'm going to jump to the next example, if that's okay.
Sounds good. Yep.
And you'll notice I just went to edit that button. You'll see it does not tell me which one is applied. So just be aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Okay, let's get into something that actually I think is a lot more useful. So let me give an example. So in my example, I have past due. I have this past due example where I have to reach out to my project managers because these are all past due, and I want this commentary. I want them to give me some information. Now, in the traditional way, I would either send an email to, I would send an email to Larry and Paul, and I would send them emails manually, or I might, maybe I export this data to Excel and then forward everybody and say, I need updates on this. But because I'm lazy, I want to use the technology here to actually do that for me. So to me, sending emails is one of the great ways to use Power Automate and Power BI. So in my case, I want to send an email to all 7 of these. And let's say this text is old, so I want an update. I've got 7 showing here. I've already got a Power Update button automatically. And I'm going to go ahead and send them an email and I want to highlight that these are, that I want some comment. I want them to update that. So now I've had the emails come to me just so that, because this is obviously fictitious names, but what you'll see is, let me jump over to my email, and this is what you'll see. If I can actually go to, oh, you know what? I've got to change. I selected more than records. I actually have a little trigger in here, a little safety measure. Let me just pick 3. And I'll talk about that trigger here and that safety thing in a second. Okay, so there, I've gotten 3 that were sent, and there they are. So now I've got this one was sent to Larry, and it's pulling in the information from my Power BI report. It's got the project number, it's got the project ID, the project name, and then I've got one. Larry actually gets two separate ones, and then Paul gets another one because I chose these three records. Let me switch back to my report. Those are the three that I've chosen. Now, I could certainly, in the email, do it to where Larry gets one email. We won't get into that because that just involves a more complex flow. But the great thing is I'm able to tap into the data from my Power BI report and use that email in a customized email. So let me walk through that. And I'm just going to open this one up because I can just kind of walk through it. Let's see why is that giving me an error? All right, again, need to know which one it is. It's probably one of these, but they're all going to be probably the same one. So let me just go ahead and click on one that I believe is the same. So again, here it is my button is clicked. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that, and let me jump back. I'm going to actually jump back to my email here. What I've done in my button that I've created is now I've added fields to my Power BI, to the button. And what I'm telling it is I want to send this data to my Power Automate to use in my flow. So that's the idea. And now what you'll also notice is, I've got three here. So if I were to create a new button, I would be actually sending a table, and I'm going to show this here in a second. But this is sort of as I start to set up my flows, think of it as I'm sending a table over to Power Automate with these fields. So what I'll do is I'll go over here and I've already got this one set up. So again, let me kind of walk through that. Let me open up that. I'll edit this one. And there it is. Power BI button has been clicked. Ignore this compose. Right now, what this is doing is just creating I'm just getting the number of records that I'm being sent, because then what I want to do is I'm actually putting in a condition. If it's more than 5, if it's less than 5, I apologize, send all the emails. If it's more than 5, don't send the emails. And I'll just kind of talk about that in a second. But essentially, what I want to do then is I want to use this send an email step. Send an email. And what I'm going to do, just for ease, let's go ahead and skip all this. And let me go ahead and just create. Let me go ahead and add that action, because I can just show you. So I want to send an email. Now, what I've done here is I've just typed in send an email, and it's going to give me a bunch of options. So I can either search for different actions, like in this case, or again, I could go to my connector if I'm using mail. But in my case, I'm using Outlook. So in Outlook has this send an email action in the Office 365. So if I were to actually click here in Office 365, I could again find that action that I want, which is send an email. So I will go ahead and click on this. Now it's asking me, where do I want the email to go to? This is where the data, the fields that I've set from Power BI to my flow really come in handy when it involves dynamic content. Now I can hard code this. And if I were to send this just to myself, I could hard code this in. But there is this thing called dynamic content, which allows me, and for some reason, it is not pulling in. Oh, yeah, here it is. I apologize. It is pulling in. It is pulling in the fields because in this case, it's only pulling in email fields that I have. So I've got these 2 different email fields that I've done. But in my case, I'm just going to have it sent to me just for ease. But let's talk about the subject. Let's say I want need update for a project, and I want to put the project name. So I'm going to pull in the field from my Power BI report. Now, the first thing that you automatically see is it says it converts this step into an apply to each, because what happens is you can send when you're sending a table over to Power Automate, it's going to actually run through this step for each single row. So it automatically knows to throw it, to surround your send an email in this apply to each. So it can get a little confusing, but after you go through this, just a couple of times, it'll start to like become easier. So again, I do that. All it did is it wrapped it around for me. I could have actually started with this, but Power Automate does it automatically for me. And I could say need an update for project. I'm embedding the project name, and now I can go here in the body of the email and say dear, and I can go down here to my dynamic content again, because this is all of this fields, all of this is available for me to choose. And again, these are all of the fields that I've added into my Power Automate button. So I could say, here's my project manager, please provide an update for project ID number. And then again, I can do that. So I can do that. And essentially that's all I have to do. I'm going to go ahead and for right now, I'm going to add in, I'm just going to terminate. I'm going to skip all the other stuff below. And let's go ahead and just test this real quick. So I'll do save and apply. And let's go back to my report. And again, this is the same button I did. So if I do that, it should again send me the 3 emails to as if it was going to the 3 individuals. So let me jump back over, and here it is. So there it is. Need project update and then that's the title. And then there was the project manager, and then there was so it's the dynamic content that you can add in. So it's a great way to be able to just, now I can just in my report when I'm doing this, I can do that, and I've just saved myself a lot of manual steps. So let me pause and see if there's any questions around this.
I don't see any questions in the chat that have come in, but if there's any questions anybody has, feel free to come off mute and ask if you'd like.
Hey, Tim,
I've got a question. Yeah, go
Yes.
ahead.
It's a similar question. Like, if you're already in Power Automate and you've got multiple flows, can you go ahead and edit this one that you've already connected to Power BI and it'll pick that up? Or do you have to go back and kind of edit this within Power BI? I know it's linked, but how does that, I'm still confused kind of how that works.
Oh, great question. And I think, Sean, the question was, can you edit it here or can you edit it in Power Automate?
Correct.
Great. You know what? Let me jump to that. I'm going to jump to Power Automate. Let me go to
Automate has, Automate has the new, the new Copilot. I don't know. It has all the new stuff. You can't really get to that in Power BI desktop.
Yeah, you can do both. So you can test refresh too. This is the one I just created. I can go here. Let's say I don't like I want to tweak the email. I can come here and I can do all of my edits. I can add more steps. That was the wrong one. Sorry about that. Go back to my flows. Send email. Let me see. Oh, I'm sorry. It was this top one. So I can do this one just fine. So this is the one I did. I can go here and say, thank you. Okay. This will work just fine. The only thing you can't do is when I go to dynamic content, you'll see only 2 things show up for Power BI. So the only difference that I have run into when you're making any changes to your flows, either within Power Automate directly or through Power Automate through Power BI is access to the dynamic content. Now you could actually hard code. I mean, you can actually manually do it, but to actually get access to the dynamic content, you got to go through the Power BI way. Sean, does that answer your question?
It does. So the fields in that field will attach to that Power Automate visual won't be accessed here if you do it outside.
They don't appear here.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I tend to do both. I tend to like make if I need to make a quick update here, It's just very easy to do. So I tend to do both. But
Right.
that is one thing to be aware of when you are working in Power Automate and Power BI.
Get it.
One other thing is when you're in Power Automate, if you go into it now, they have a new designer.
Yes.
But in Power, when you're going here through Power BI, sorry, I got to switch back to my other screen. When I edited here, it's the old designer. So just be aware of that.
Right. All
Um,
right. Thanks.
okay.
There's one more. There's actually one more question, Tim, that just came in. It says, does the email recipient need a Power BI license?
No, because what you're doing is you are using, and that's the other thing is when you start getting into these, the answer is no, you do not. The recipient does not need a Power BI like a pro license. Where you do have to be careful, especially like with refreshing, and I've run into this, is when you are using when you are in Power Automate, if you go up to some of the slides, for example, let's go to send an email. Okay, the email has to come from somebody. So with a lot of Power Automate steps, if you go up here, you're actually going to see the connector. So this is connected to my account, so the email will come from me. And like if I go up here to Power BI, if I go here, it's coming from my connect. These are what's called the connectors. So for example, if you want to refresh the refresh one that I just did, if you're using an account, because let's say you have a service account and that account doesn't have a Power BI Pro license, then it's not going to have access to that Pro workspace potentially. If you've got if you're using say a regular workspace. So there is a thing with connectors, but should not impact the recipient because all they're going to do is receive an email.
Thanks, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey,
Where you do get
Tim.
into some licensing issues with some of these actions, if I go here to an action, the other thing to be aware of, and Mike and Matt, I think we were sort of talking about this at the beginning. If some of the actions, I need to find one, you'll have a little diamond next to them. That means it's premium and you have to have other special license for that. So there are some of those, but the one I just showed here, these can be done with the normal license.
I was just going to point out there's a premium little thing on your thing, all built-in standard premium. So I would assume,
Yep.
Stay away from those unless you want to pay. So
And premium means, like if you want to use a third party, it might mean having a license with that. Again, it's there. And I will say I'm not an expert in the licensing, so I'm not even going to go there, but just be aware of premium versus standard. And there's all kinds of other, things that you can do within Power Automate. So, all right, let's get to, I'm going to get to one more example if I can. Okay. One thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to show this right now, is this bottom button. One thing you'll notice is if I push the button here, let's say I'm in a hurry and I accidentally I want to send an email. I want to do one to Larry, but you'll see I've got it selected, but I'm quick. I accidentally click off Larry and I do that. And all of a sudden now I've triggered this flow. Once it's triggered, it's triggered. And 7 emails now are going out. So one of the things to be aware of with Power Automate in this, so there's no confirmation like, hey, are you sure? So one of the things I've done a couple of workarounds because this is fine. This is 7 emails. What happens if this was 700? Okay. So you got to be a little bit careful of controlling this. So a couple of things I've done is, first of all, is I have an alternate button here. If I click this, now I've got a confirmation that pops up. But what I've actually done here is done this in Power BI. And this is actually, I think I have it as a group. What I've done is I've just created a simple group with a gray transparent shape, a text box to display this sort of text, and gives me that sort of confirmation. There's my Power Automate button to actually send the flow, and then a cancel. And then I just group these, and then using bookmarks, I have a show and hide confirmation. So there's an alternate I've done, because one thing I will say when you're using this, especially send emails or with Power Automate, is once that trigger is flowed, you might have unintended consequences. So one little trick I used, one other one that I have done, which I won't get into because of time, is I've built in some limitations on the Power Automate end, where if the number of records is above a certain number, it cancels the flow, just to protect that as well. So again, I just put that, I throw those out there for a couple of tips. All right, one other quick example that I'm going to show is approve project documents, and then I want to jump to Power Automate or Power Apps. Is one other example I have is, let me go to, let's see, I believe it's this one. Okay, one other action that I have in my to do is, let's say in my case, every one of these projects have a document. So I've just got documents that are stored on a SharePoint document library. I've just connected to that library. I've got the link here. And let's say part of my job is I have to review them. I got to click on here. So I review this document and then I need to approve it. But normally what I would do is I would go to SharePoint, go to my documents here, find my documents, and then I would go here and click on it, and then I'd have to go here and change the review down to to approved, and I would of course do that for each one. But because I can pull all of this data in, I can actually help automate a lot of this by jumping over here back to my my report, and let's say I've looked at these three. Again, I got links here. I've looked at this one and I say, hey, this is great. I'm going to approve this. So I click on it. I've got my flow up here. And now I trigger it. And what happens is, behind the scene, it will go to SharePoint, find that document, and then it will change the status. And if I jump over to it, there it is. It's now approved. So I've used Power Automate to do all that for me. So this is a great way that Power Automate and Power BI integrates with SharePoint. So, and all I've done here is, if I click on this button, I've got the ID. Now this is the ID of this is the SharePoint ID of the document that I have in my data set. And then let me just quickly, I'm just going to show that flow, but this is kind of just giving another example of what can be done. Let's see, and it would be right here, update document metadata. And if I click on that, again, you're going to see Power Automate button clicked. Again, apply to each, because I could have 10 records. And then I'm just using a SharePoint connector now to update the file properties. And then I just go through, tell it, okay, here's my SharePoint site. That was the document in my library. It needs the ID of the document. But again, because of that dynamic ID field, which I have here, which I have passed from my Power BI report over to SharePoint, I can now change it, and I'm now making it approved. So it's one step for me to go ahead and do that, and it's just a great way to do that. So what we've, what you're able to do now is, start to build out things that people can do and see and interact with. Say, you don't want your users to go to SharePoint and do all that. All right, I see a question here. Can you integrate with SQL Server in the same way to modify the value? So I will tell you, I anticipate the answer is yes. I'm actually starting to, I'm starting to kind of play with SQL Server and Power Automate, but I have not worked on that. So the answer I believe on that is going to be yes, but I'll say that with 95% confidence. And I don't know if anybody else in the group has worked with that, but that isn't my next area exploring.
Yeah, I've done it. I think that might be a premium connection though. So and there's two ways to do it. You can write a SQL statement and execute that, or just run a store procedure. So I've usually done it via store procedures, but I think they are premium.
Sean, I believe you're correct on the premium, because
yeah.
So, all right. I have another example. I'm gonna skip that one in the interest of time. But really just wanted to give just a couple of simple examples, because what I have found is, when I've started to do this, I start with a simple example and then I start to really build on it, especially using a lot of the actions and steps that are available in Power Automate. And I want to jump to just a couple of, again, here's a quick, I'm not going to go through any of these, but you can see just a ton of things that can be done if you work with teams, sending messages. I mean, there's just so much that can be done. These are things I want to make sure you're aware of. I think we've touched on, covered them. When triggering a flow, there's no confirmation. This second one, again, always be careful. Quick tip. Here's a quick tip. If you want to know what is being sent to your flow. So I've got, here's a quick example. I'm going to filter this, I'm going to unfilter this. Let's say in my case, I think, oh, I want this table to only show delayed. So I'm going to go up here to filters, and I'm going to go to delay project status. Let me filter that to delayed. Good. Only got 2 of them. I'm going to hit send emails. If I were to do this, I would actually send 20 emails because I have filtered this table, but I have not filtered this button. So all of the data that I'm being sent is actually, and if I'll show you a little trick. If you want to know what data is being sent to your flow, just make it a little bigger. Go over here and make this a table, and there you go. So you can actually toggle between that, and it's a nice little tip to see and make sure that your button is set up, especially if you've got any filters. So my takeaway, we've covered this third one about updating power, and then again we already talked about the environment. So those we've already covered all 4 of those. So so I'm going to do one more pause before I jump to the Power Apps integration.
Tim, while you were showing the first part there, I logged in and edited or in just in the web browser, and it actually lets you go between the environments there on a Dataverse side. So like it looks like that feature might not have made it to the desktop software, but I'm coming from this from a Dataverse standpoint. And anytime I hear pushing stuff into the default, so that like your demo started off with, or you only have the option to go to default, that's generally a no-no from coming at this from a very Dataverse standpoint. Is that, other than not being able to move between environments or something like that, that seems to be the right answer when you're doing it the way you're showing? I don't, probably not being clear here, but
Todd, I have not worked with Dataverse much, so I don't really have an
Okay.
answer on that.
If anybody was, I guess maybe like I said, that's the view I'm coming from. If anybody is close to dealing with Dataverse and doing ALM and with solutions and stuff, I guess my 2 cents would be a little careful with the default. I don't know what in a non-Dataverse world it seems like it's probably okay, but anyways, you can edit it in the web, and it does give you the option to move around between your environments. So
Todd, I may look into that as well, so that might be a workaround. So, and I did see the comment here, Mike and Sarah, about the screens. Yeah, this is definitely a problem. For some reason, I've run into this. I think it's on my side. So, okay, Mike, how am I on time in terms of we're at 6:45 your time?
Yeah, you're great. You're great. So you've got plenty of time to cover the next thing you want to talk about.
Okay. So what I'm going to do now is let's move to Power Apps. And let me move, this one I'm actually going to move over to my report because I am actually going to be doing this in the service, and I'll explain why. So let's talk the Power Apps integration. Now, before I jump into I've got 3 examples. Let me show the most simplest, and that is just embedding an app. So let me go to this page. Now, this is just a standalone app that I just created on the fly here as it was a sample. But this is essentially a Power App here embedded in my report. It has no tie into my report, but it's completely it's usable here. I can actually go through here and do this survey. So it is definitely possible to embed a standalone app in your report, but that's no fun. Let's get to the next thing. So let's go to this example. So here's here's where I really like the Power BI and the Power Apps integration. And that is around, like in this case, track and commentary. So I've got this in my earlier example in Power Automate, I had all those emails go to project managers for past due projects, and I want comments. Now, what they would then have to do is I'm in my case, I'm using a comments list. And I'm just tracking, and let me jump back to my report here. Sorry about that. These columns here, these project ID, let's say this is coming from one set of data, my data warehouse or whatever. And then the comments, this data set here is actually coming from a SharePoint list with the project ID as the connector, the key. So I've got a very simple list where I'm asking people to provide their updates. So in the traditional manual way, what people would do is either come here and edit this item or add a new item, and then I would refresh my data source. But I don't want them to have to do that. I want them to be able to do it via an embedded app. Now, the easiest way, which is what this app here on the right is this is an app that if with any SharePoint list, if you go up here to integrate and Power Apps and hit create an app, it will create you a 3-screen app fully usable tied to this list, which is exactly what this one is here. And I just had it, I used the automatic process. It saved my my Power App, and then I have embedded it. And I'll show how we add the app here in a second. And it's completely usable, so I could literally go here and go into this. I've clicked on this. It's got all these buttons up here. This is the sort of standard that they provide, and I can even go ahead and edit this, and I can say new comment, added here. So I can go ahead and do that. And it's there, and then there it is. And if I go back to my list, P115, if I refresh this, it's probably a timing issue. There it is. So quick and easy way to quickly add that so people don't have to switch back and forth. But again, this is quick and easy. It's got some disadvantages. Let's say I want to add a new one. I'm at P117, and I go here, my user adds a new one, and I type in P117A accidentally, I just type it wrong. It's not going to then obviously match up. And of course, I want to make it as easy as possible for the users. So we're actually going to move to the third example, which is a fully integrated app. And then we will migrate over to actually doing that. So let's go to the third example here. All right, same list, but I have an embedded app here. And the first thing you'll notice is it says here, you must select a specific record to enable app. I've got 7 records showing, and I want to add a comment here. I'm Adele. So I click on this one. That screen goes away, and all of a sudden, P17 is right here, and I can add my comments. Add new. And let me jump back to my, let's refresh it. It's a timing issue probably, so let's give that a second. And there it is. So it's been added. Now, of course, it's not showing up here because I'm importing the data. Now I need to refresh the data. It is one of the downsides of this is that, I have to then refresh it. Going back to the beginning, this is where I've added for users a refresh button to then allow them to refresh it. Or I could have even added a refresh step after that this gets updated. But that is one thing to be aware of. However, it is easy here to, at least if they click around, as they click, the data is changing and it is being tied. Now, the Power BI report is not a direct connection to the SharePoint data, so I have to refresh it. But the Power App is. So as I go back to even the one I just did, it is there. So I can go back here. The other thing you'll notice is if I click on, say, P107, it says edit record. And this bottom one does not have a comment because there is no record. If I click on it, it says add new. So I've tailored this app to be a little bit more user friendly to kind of, sort of switch, because that was the what I wanted to do to make it easy. And then of course, if I click out, it tells me that I have to select a record because I wanted to build that in. So I'm going to kind of show that. All right, now here's the other thing to be aware of. If I go back to my Power BI, my report, I have the actual desktop here. I have that report. I've got it here, and there is a Power App. However, for some reason, using this integration between Power BI and Power Apps right now is no longer working when you use Power BI desktop, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So what I have found is you actually have to edit your report in Power BI service. I actually discovered this like a day or two before I was to give a talk to a different user group, and I had to scramble and found this, and it seems to be an issue that others are finding. But let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and kind of walk through embedding this app. So the first thing I do, I'm in Power BI service, so I've got my published report, and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click edit because I want to go ahead and edit my report. And there is the Power Apps button. So if I go ahead and let me just go ahead and add one. And again, it's going to give you the option. Now, this is very similar to Power Automate. It's going to say, step 1, select the fields from your data set that you want to use in your app. And then, of course, then you can do that. And it's very similar to Power Automate, where whatever data fields you add here get sort of integrated with the app. However, you may find that you don't really need data fields. For example, if I go back to this example where I have an embedded app here, if I click on this, there is no data, there's no integration between these two. It may look like it because I've got a project ID field here, but I could put any field, but there's no integration between these two, because if I click on this table, nothing here changes. But Power Apps, in order for you to select an app to embed, you have to put in a field. So if I just wanted to add a standalone app, like my first two examples that are not integrated with any of my data, I could literally pull I could just pull a random, delete that and click on I could pull a random field. Now it's saying, okay, do you want to create a new app or do you want to choose an app? So that's one thing to be aware of between Power Automate and Power Apps is with the integration is you always have to have some field here in the data. The other thing you'll notice is up here is this is a drop down for the environment. So you can actually choose different environments. So I could choose a training environment and I could actually select an app that I've already got created. Or I could create a new one in this environment. So with Power BI and Power Automate, you can use different environments with your apps. All right, so let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Let's go ahead and actually I want to add in a field because I want to kind of go through and at least start the process of creating it. And what I want to do is I want to integrate with this table. Now, I need to know what fields I want to pass over to it. And in my case, I only really need to pass, in this situation, I only need to pass one field, and that's my project ID, because this is the ID that is the connector between my SharePoint list, which is what my app is going to be connected to, and then my main data source. So I'm going to go to my main, this is my main data source here, and I'm going to pass over, and it's this column here. I'm going to pass over this field here. So I'm going to choose project ID. Sure, I select it. And again, and now I'm going to go ahead. Let me change that to training, and I'm going to do create new. And it's going to kick me now over to Power Apps, and it's going to go ahead and create a mobile phone layout screen as a standard one. Now, what you're going to see in this that I've done it is a couple of things. First of all, it's created a gallery. It's already created a gallery. You can see here's the project IDs that I've sent over. So that's the same data set as that table that has all these project IDs. So that's been sent over. The other thing is this Power BI integration control, and that's the container of this. And if I look up here, if I click on this gallery, this is the gallery. This is just the listing out the records. The items on it is the Power BI integration.data. So if I click here, I can see it's a table, and I can see that there is basically that this is a table. So this here, this Power BI integration is the integrator between Power BI and Power Apps, and it contains that data. So now that I have that, I can actually do this. The reason I say you have to use Power BI Service, if I would have done this in Power BI Desktop, what would happen is you would see the Power BI integration control, but there would be no gallery. And then when if I were to, and it's so for some reason, there's a disconnect between Power BI Desktop and this Power BI integration control. So I just be aware of that. All right. I'm going to skip over. I'm going to pause, Mike. What I'm going to jump to next is I'm actually going to open up the app that I've built and kind of walk through it. But I do want to pause if there's any questions.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good, Tim. Don't see any in the chat at the moment. Does anybody have any questions you want to come off mute for? I guess one question I've got, Tim, is in terms of licensing. So in order to do this with Power Apps, I'm assuming you're going to have a subscription that's separate than, Power BI or Power. Is that true? Would you need to have a subscription to do this?
I think the answer is yes. You have to be able to access Power Apps. Again, I don't know the licensing, but yes, you have to have access to Power Apps, and if you don't, then you won't be able to. As far as I'm aware, you wouldn't be able to create an app.
Okay, and then the people using the app, would they also have to have a license for Power Apps?
That is a good question, and I'm trying to think. I don't know the answer to that, Mike. We've created apps where people they have to have access. They have to share the app with them.
Yep.
I don't know the answer to that, so I don't really want to. I don't know if anybody else knows the answer to that.
Sure.
All right. So let me.
I'm 99% sure you need to have like I said, I come from the Dataverse world, so this is all built in. But if you don't have Dataverse or BC, I believe you do have to have a separate license for the Power.
Good to know. Okay. Yeah, I just thought I'd check. Thanks, Todd.
All right. So what I'm going to do now, I'm not going to go through all the little itty bitty of setting this up. I actually have a YouTube video. It took about a 30-minute video where I walk through the details, but I'm going to kind of hit the high level just to show this. And again, I'm sure there, as with anything, there's probably other ways to do that. But the thing it was important to me was, number one, I like to give this little warning because with this form, right, you can only show one at a time. So in my app, the way I've designed it is I can only show one. So if, and then of course, like things like the edit button and, changing text. But again, every situation is different, but let me just kind of give the basics to kind of show what I've done. And then, so let me go ahead and edit this. And the beauty of it is once you created it, you can go ahead and edit it and it'll kick you back over to Power Apps to make all the changes. The other thing I'll say while this is loading, I have found, especially if, like when I was new to Power Automate and Power Apps, Power Automate I have found was so much easier. It was such a smaller learning curve. a lot easier to get in and get working. Power Apps, I found, has a little bit more of a learning curve. So it did take me quite a bit more time just to kind of do this. A lot of, Googling and seeing what others have done. But again, the whole thing is, this is all learning and integrating with these applications. So what I've done basically is, in my example, is I've removed that gallery because I don't need the gallery in my Power App. This is just a simple phone layout. Is I just have a simple form. I'm connecting it to my data source. When you connect a form, you have to connect the data source. This project comments is a simple SharePoint list that I've set up here. So I have a title and the comments. I have to tell it, like, again, with a form, when you're displaying a form, you have to be able to tell it which record to display. Now, this is where, it does get a little bit more complex, because when I'm looking at my report, if I go back to my report, I think I can go back to it here. If I don't have a record selected, I mean, like, I'd be sending like all these 7 records over to my Power App. It can only display one record. So when I go up here into my items, when I tell it which item to display in my form, what it's going to say, I've had to put in some coding, and the way I've done this is, and this is like, I found this on, I think, on Microsoft site, is to say, okay, here's my Power BI integration table. And if I look at this right now, I was only sending one record because I had clicked on it. But if I had not clicked on a record, you would see all 7 records here. So I need to tell it which one to show. So in my case, I tell it, find the first one where the title, and the title is this project ID, because SharePoint, the first column is called title. I renamed it here project ID. But where the title field in my SharePoint list is the first project ID record in this list. Go to the project comments and look that up. So go here, find where the project ID is that first item. And then and display that. So if I had sent over, say, 10 records, it's going to only display the first record. So that's kind of how I'm doing it to tell it. Another thing I have to think about is, when you get into working with Power Apps, when you're working with a form, is there's a mode, a property called default mode. This is the form a new one where you're going to add a new record, or are you editing an existing record? So you need to be able to tell it. I want to be able to tell it, because in my case, right, I might be editing an existing record here, or my user might be adding a new record here. So I need to be able to, I had to, think about that and how to build that into the app. So again, I just have, this is some more coding to basically say, again, take that first record, that first project, filter the list, filter that list, and then count how many rows it is. And if it's 1, which would mean go here, filter this list to whatever that, what the record is. And if you find it, and if there's 1 record, that means you're editing it. But if you don't, the other answer would be either be 0 or 1. If you don't find it, then that means it's a new record. And then I can tell it, again, edit mode new, or edit mode edit, or form mode. So, again, have to think about setting this up. Then the next thing I wanted is the text of the text box of my button. And again, this is just more for user experience. Again, I'm using a very similar thing here, is edit record and new record. So again, different ways for me to tell it, as I'm doing this integration with my Power App. And again, it all comes back to this Power BI integration. Now, the last thing I have is this, what's called a warning box. And what this is I want this box to appear, like here, I want this box to appear if there are more than 1 record shown. Because if there's more than 1 record shown, the only one record that will be showing is the first one, and that's not going to be good for my users. So what I want is a warning box to display. And again, all I do there is create, and let me actually show this. This is Very similar to like what you would do in Power BI about kind of creating bookmarks and so forth. I've actually sort of just created one, and let me just show you what it looks like. Is this is just a group of two things. One is a white shaped rectangle, and then the second thing is a label. So all I do is place this actually over the form and then display it. I have there's a visible property here. And again, if the number of rows of that table that I'm sending over, if it's one record, then make the visible property of this warning box to be false. In other words, hide it. And then that will go away. Let's see if I. Yeah, so it goes away. So again, little tricks just to kind of make this, to help with this integration. And so that's kind of how that would work. So here, one record's being sent. It's that warning box is hidden. But if I select away, the form is still there. I've just placed a box over it, so it gives that appearance. So, so just a few little tricks that that are being done to do this integration. And then you have to save it, and you do have to publish it. That's the other thing with Power Apps, and you get into that. But so let me pause and see if there is any questions.
I have just a general question, Tim. So this is really good, by the way. So thanks for doing this. Is a lot of work. So in the example here, you're kind of enforcing that someone selects a record to edit. Do you know if there is a way to do like bulk edits? So if you wanted to say, edit kind of like you would do in Excel. So you had like a grid. And if you wanted to do kind of those edits all at once and then send those through Power Apps, is that something you've done, or is that something you're familiar with?
It's not something I've done, but just thinking, one thought could be creating building an app that allows you to do that, because and then embedding it in your because embedding it back into your report. So I have to anticipate it's doable. You should be able to, and I'm trying to think if I've actually done this. You should be able to actually create the app, and then like say, and then so when you go into Power BI and use the app here, it will create this mobile layout. But when you go into Power Apps to create an app, you can actually use the tablet layout, which is bigger and gives you, more real estate. You can actually, and then you can also do a custom size. So I want to say theoretically, I always think that everything's possible. But you could build out the app with that functionality, create the app, and then when you go to embed it, when you go to integrate it here, like if you were to add in your feed, go here, create the Power App, add in the fields you need. Let's say, you want this field, and then do choose app,
Okay.
choose the one you want, and then go through and do that in that integration. I have not done that, but I have to think it's possible.
Okay.
Short answer, yes. Long answer, there's a lot of pain points if you have massive data.
Yeah, and Todd, you might be going like, especially when you're working with Power Apps, when you get into the concept of delegation, when Power Apps connects to data sources, you can only send so much data over. And I think, in fact, if I go over to the form, you're going to see all these warnings, delegation warning. These are all basically saying that's a whole nother concept with Power Apps and data. With this approach here, I never worry about it because I'm only ever sending one record over. But in your example, Todd, I agree with you. Like, you do got to be careful with other complexities. So,
Yep.
Yeah, Mike. Yes, I would agree. It's definitely possible. I'll shoot a little chat or a YouTube channel in chat that was very productive for me to watch on the Power App side. Power Apps is a whole different beast than Power Automate. I would agree with Tim on that. So
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. I was just curious. Yeah,
Again, Mike, I do, and everyone, I have a video, I cover like the specifics and walk through this. But again, I mean, the key thing is it's this Power BI integration. And again, what I have found is editing it in Power BI service. And then it's, boy, there's a lot of, capability that, that can be done.
yeah, it's pretty slick. You can do a lot of things, and like you've shown, when you use these things together, the possibilities are just amazing.
Yeah. Believe that is all that I had in terms of, are there any other questions or can you share the YouTube video? I'm gonna, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna switch over here. I have if I have a YouTube channel, it's, small one, I'm trying to add, I have a bunch of videos about integrating, I have one here integrating Power Apps. Obviously this is not a, user-friendly one, but if you search my name on YouTube, you'll get it. And I see Sean, you put another one. I think Reza was probably one of the ones I looked at. There's I think, as we all find with a lot of these, you find those 1 or 2 or 3 videos that people have done. So that's a great resource. But
Yeah, and I've got your links here, Tim, just so you know. They're in the chat as well. So to your channel and also to your LinkedIn.
gotcha. So any other questions?
Hi, I just had a quick question. Is this a series or a one-time event?
So just to answer that for you, so that this is so we have monthly meetings. Our group basically we have different topics every month, so it'll vary. So this particular one was just on the Power Platform. In the past, we've done meetings that talk about Fabric. Some meetings just talk about Power BI itself. So